Hello all, I hope you're well in these extraordinary times. I'd like to welcome you today to the Fintech Finance Virtual Arena, where I'm hosting you today. Now, in today's arena, we will be discussing the very exciting developments in open banking and the even more exciting idea of what's it like to get $1 million. So joining me today is none other than Pablo Viguera, the co-founder of Belvo. So Pablo and I have, interestingly, not met before, but when I was over in Mexico, I met his co-founder, Jorge, to discuss everything in terms of Latin American payments and open banking. But here we are today with Pablo in our virtual arena. So Pablo, without further ado, could you give me and our audience a bit of background to Belvo? How did you create this platform? How did the idea come together? And really, what separates Belvo from your competitors?
Yeah, hey Doug, thanks for having me on the show. So Belvo is the open banking API platform for Latin America. We essentially enable fintech innovators to connect to their end users' bank and financial information to extract data to build more efficient, more empowering, and more inclusive financial products. So effectively, what we do is we create a one-stop shop, easy to use and easy to integrate API that any developer can plug into and can effectively connect their fintech apps to their users' bank and financial information. So we started the company a year ago, basically from the work that we've done in Europe, in fintech. My co-founder Oriol and I were previously building and scaling Verse, which is the Venmo of Southern Europe, peer-to-peer payments app. And we'd essentially had to build all of this core infra ourselves. And then prior to that, I was also at Revolut, where we had seen what open banking, PSD2, and all of the regulator-driven innovations had done for the explosion and the expansion of the fintech landscape in Europe. So when we were scaling Verse to LATAM, or thinking about it at least, we saw that there was a very, very big lack of infrastructure for fintech innovators to connect to. Very hard to plug into legacy banking infrastructure. And that kind of, that was something that made us, one, realize that it would be extremely hard for us to scale in LATAM without building the infra ourselves. And two, validated that a lot of fintechs had a common problem. So that was, kind of where we realized that we had a business, in this massive pain point.
Absolutely brilliant. And I've got to ask before we go any further, are the rumors of the kind of work-life culture in Revolut true? And what has that brought to Belvo?
Well, I was an early employee at Revolut. I think one of the things that that I got out of my experience was being close to extremely talented colleagues and extremely ambitious people. And I think, having a product start out of the UK and turning it into a global phenomenon without borders and, working relentlessly to accomplish a goal, I think is definitely something that, any person that has worked at Revolut kind of, takes with them for forever. I think for me, it's similar. I mean, I started my career in investment banking, right? So, very demanding atmosphere and, kind of a boot camp for your professional life, so to speak. And I think Revolut is kind of that also. It's like a boot camp for fintech, right? But obviously you're exposed to amazing people that I have no doubt will go on to do amazing things, whether it's at Revolut or beyond, right? So, becoming the innovators of finance of, tomorrow or the next 5 to 10 years.
Absolutely brilliant. Now, going for a bit of a top-down approach, I know you've obviously come from the European side of things. But for our viewers who might not be familiar with the open banking scene in Latin America, you touched on it briefly, the lack of infrastructure. But what's it like now over the last couple of years? How would you describe open banking in Latin America?
Yeah, so I would say it's, obviously, so one is that it's very fragmented, right? So obviously when we think about Latin America, and this is also part of our vision is, we think as Latin America as a whole, but then you scratch beneath the surface and it's very, very different to what you can see in the UK or what you can see in Europe, right? So it's different countries, different jurisdictions, different legislation, different kind of banking landscape, different banking infrastructure. So it's, to navigate that is very tricky. And there won't be anytime soon kind of a common banking industry agenda or banking industry regulation in the form that PSD2 or open banking has kind of swept across Europe. That being said, there's more and more founders that are seeing Latin America as just one region, similar to how fintech founders in Europe see Europe as just one unique market. And what we've seen is that basically what we empower them to do is have an infrastructure play that they can use and they can leverage to better address that expansion and better address that kind of pan LATAM vision, right? So, and in terms of open banking, specifically about what's been going on in the past few years. So probably the biggest markets in LATAM, Mexico and Brazil, have had a pretty ambitious kind of open banking agenda, very much regulator driven, and similar to what has happened in UK with open banking. Actually, the regulators in both of those countries are very close to to the FCA and to the the regulators in UK to try to replicate in some shape or form what has happened in UK in those two markets, right? So those are really the only two markets where there's any meaningful developments in terms of open banking. Brazil, the agenda is kicking off in a few months with the intended completion of the open banking plans by end of 2021. But then obviously, as we've seen in Europe, there will be a period of time where adoption will need to be, will need to kick in, and where every stakeholder will actually need to comply with, whether that's public API development, whether that's technical requirements, whether that's onboarding, blah blah blah, right? So there will need to be a lot of kind of education as well from all the stakeholders involved.
Very exciting, and I'll come back to Brazil later on, because there's some very interesting links between Belvo and Brazil. But in terms of Mexico, which is compared to maybe, as I said, Brazil, predominantly a cash-based society still. What does that mean for Belvo? And what are the opportunities or maybe even challenges that you face when trying to get into a cash-based ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us and really for any fintech, what we're seeing in countries where bankarization rates are so low, right? So on average, bankarization is maybe tops 40%, 50% in all the major, LATAM countries. That means that if you want to provide financial services to, a person picked out at random for open banking specifically, the chances that that person will have any data that you can leverage and use to, understand that client better, see what his or her credit score is like, see whether or not he or she will be able to repay a loan, so on and so forth. The probability of them having relevant financial information will be low if you only look at banking data, right? Part of the vision of Belvo is to, use all that financial data that is scattered a whole bunch of different places and not necessarily within banks to actually create the one, common source of truth for all that financial data, right? So for example, some of the use cases that we're seeing in places like Mexico with some of our clients are that they're building products for gig economy workers, for example, right? So they want to provide Uber drivers, rapid delivery people, and so on with financial products, right? Because banks don't cater to those people. And for them, what's useful is to have an access via the Belvo API to those users, Rappi accounts, those users Uber accounts, because they can see a history of what those people are, basically making an income, right? Every hour they complete a trip, every week they cash out what they've earned in that week at a local corner store, and so on. And that's extremely powerful data that can then be leveraged to build, effectively new financial products, right? So that's one of the really big opportunities that we see of actually not only, creating an open banking platform, but more an open finance platform, right? Where Belvo can act as a single source of truth that even down the line, banks can plug into. For example, if they want to provide this Uber delivery person with a mortgage, right? They're not able to do so now because the traditional data models that they've used are just bank models, right? Those people are not banked, but in 1-2 years time, they might have, a Klar bank account that is plugged into Belvo, and they can leverage that to see their transactions, their accounts, and so on and so forth. So it's a very big, opportunity to really, and this is generally, something that we see about fintech in LATAM, is that because bancarization is so low, fintech really has the possibility of expanding the size of the pie dramatically, right? So it gives people access to financial services that those people weren't able to have access to them before. It's not like in Europe where Challenger Bank A or Challenger Bank B effectively steals market share away from traditional banks, right? Fintech has this this power in LATAM to be a force of change and be a force of inclusion and create a much larger market for financial products. The big challenge that we see is in some cases is education as well, right? So education around finance, education around money, right? Because it's great to give people credit, but it's also a big challenge to keep those people credit worthy, right? And keep those people out of bad debt, keep those people out of not being able to repay their loans, right? So it's a mix that we see will need to kind of go hand in hand as fintech scales. Financial education is extremely important in LATAM.
That must be such an interesting ecosystem to be in, really effectively being able to, as you said, look at the European model that you were such a big part of, and just go in and in any way possible, just completely shape it. And I love that dynamic you say, it's not just open banking, it's opening up finance, because you then suddenly realize, well, actually, if I change that, the amount of times I hear the Uberification of banking because of open banking, it actually sounds like Latin America is actually well placed to take advantage of that. So I wish you guys all the best in that regard. And now on to even more exciting effectively events. Belvo raised, was it $10 million? And I've got to ask, what was that experience like? I mean, that's typically something, as an individual, you'd only dream of, but, even having your own organization, raise $10 million, that's got to be such an incredible and emotional experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're very fortunate to have completed this fundraise. More importantly, I think it's a testament to one, obviously the hard work the team has been putting in over the past year, but also it's a testament to the potential of fintech in LATAM, right? And really the transformational force it can have across the region, because ultimately, we build the picks and shovels of the fintech innovators, and for us, it's great to have the resources to then go on and equip these fintech innovators of today, or even the fintech innovators of tomorrow that don't yet exist and will be able to exist because of us. And also, we're extremely happy to be bringing on board top-notch and top-tier investors that can really help us for the months, years, and decades to come, right? And who have not only share our vision about providing more next generation infrastructure for the innovators in finance of today and tomorrow, but also have deep operational expertise and scaling infra, software as a service, and specifically in Latin, right?
Brilliant. Yeah, that actually brings me on to my next question. You did touch on it slightly there, but what will this cash injection really do for Belvo? What's next for you?
Yeah, so I mean, we'll maintain, very much the objective of continuing to build, great products for our customers, the fintech innovators of LATAM. Obviously, part of the goal with this new fundraise will be to speed things up, and to build, an amazing product faster. One of the things that we're actively doing now is branching out, obviously, in terms of coverage, right? So, not only looking at, say Mexico or Colombia, but also expanding coverage to other countries like Brazil, which are very important to us, and we'll be launching very soon. But also beyond geographic coverage, also looking at, specific verticals and specific developer tools that we can keep adding to our API to keep making it, the go-to platform for developers to, plug into financial data across the continent, right? So, for example, one of the things that, we're developing at the moment is what we call an intelligence API, right? Which goes beyond just the pipes through which you can access data, but you can actually get contextualization on that data. So being able to not only get, a specific end users, transaction data on his or her credit card or his or her checking account for the past 12 months, but you can also, answer questions through our API, such as, what's this person's income? What's this person's affordability on a loan? Should I lend to this person? Yes, no. What are his assets, her liabilities, so on and so forth, right? So that's going to be a big part of the next, the next few months. And also, we're looking to bring on board, to execute this plan, the best and brightest, right? So, we have this really cool kind of dual hub setup. We're in Mexico, we're in Barcelona. So we have kind of the best of both worlds and Spanish-speaking world across the Atlantic. And we'll also be opening up an office in Sao Paulo in Brazil relatively soon. So, we're hiring across the board, in engineering, product, business development. So, exciting times.
Absolutely brilliant. And that's just segued perfectly into my next question. And that I read that one of your early one of your early investors was David Velez, the founder of Nubank over in Brazil. And we have touched on it briefly, but I'd love to hear your perspective about the financial scene in Brazil because of these. I think the only way to describe them probably is these gigantic challenger banks that have such a big following. How would you categorize, for our viewers who might not be aware, of the banking scene over in Brazil?
Yeah, I mean, every time someone asks me about Nubank, I say it's the Revolut of LATAM, like ×5, right? So it's this gigantic challenger bank. It's actually been around for quite some time, right? For almost 6 or 7 years now, and it's really amazing because in most of LATAM and Brazil specifically, the time of reckoning for banks has not yet arrived. I think in Europe and UK specifically, as part of after the financial crisis, banks started to become, more open, also via kind of regulatory changes and so on. But in Brazil, banks have historically had a very tight grip of the banking ecosystem and the credit market, deposit market. So, when Nubank came around, it was really, inspirational for a lot of people that were either trapped within that system and they couldn't really choose because it's they all end up controlling the whole market, and also it was a way for a lot of people that weren't able to get credit to easily get a credit card, right? So they've been doing phenomenally well, and I mean they're continuing to do phenomenally well, and it's most definitely, I think, also an inspiration for a lot of fintech founders in Latin America, right? So I mean, now you're seeing Nubank effectively launching very successfully in Mexico, so executing on a multi-country LATAM expansion, and if anything, we'll start seeing many more cases like that in the years to come, especially as talent continues or increases to flow into fintech, and capital as well, right? Continues to flow into fintech in LATAM. So definitely one of the big success stories and inspirational stories as well for a lot of fintech founders out there.
Absolutely brilliant. How exciting. And I mean, I've got to bring it up because of how global it is. Now, obviously, the pandemic has caused us to be doing these videos from home in the virtual arena. But how has this pandemic shaped the way that open banking has been adopted in Latin America? Do you see it fueling its adoption and fueling the rise of digital services in financial technology? Or has it effectively put things on hold and is looking to help other things like customer experience beforehand?
I think if anything, the pandemic will drive digitalization across the board. I think in specific areas of finance or of fintech where kind of touch points with the consumer will not necessarily be physical. Down the line, there will be an acceleration of digitalization, investing in new processes, and so on, and that will ultimately drive greater fintech adoption, right? So that will also be part of a new wave of education towards shifting to digital in finance. What we've seen is that that is actually the pace of change is actually increased. And when it comes to infrastructure, there's a real pressure, I think, now for be it legacy players such as banks or financial institutions to really kind of invest in technology, invest in infrastructure, and really kind of embrace kind of a new wave of customer interactions and how things are done. I think the magnitude of this pandemic will have different consequences to what the financial crisis had, but it will be very, very quick in terms of certain adoptions when it comes to finance and fintech.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, I'm very excited to see where it goes. As a fan of visiting Latin America, especially for holiday and work, I look forward to seeing that. And lastly, I've got to ask, with this newfound expansion that hopefully we'll be seeing from you guys, and the fact that you're based in Barcelona, will we see a kind of pan-Iberian work with Belvo helping out, for instance, open banking maybe in Portugal and Spain going in the future? Right now we're very focused on LATAM. I think the fact that part of our tech and product team is here is that's where we were when we started, and ultimately the challenges are extremely different, the infrastructure and also the nature of the market and the maturity and so on, right? So I think we have enough challenges on our plate to tackle Mexico, Colombia, Chile, yeah. Peru, the list goes on, right? But who knows where we if LATAM will be kind of our last destination, but for at least for the next 5 years, we got plenty to tackle down there. Well, guys, I wish you the best of luck. Thank you, Pablo, very much for joining us here today in the FinTech Finance Virtual Arena. Make sure to catch the rest of our series and more at www.fintechf.com and, of course, YouTube. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you. Bye.